Most people don't know very much about Herbert Hoover and Lou Henry Hoover.
What a life. What a story.
Fortitude, enterprise, courage, and compassion. All of those values are part of the Herbert Hoover story.
Lou Henry Hoover is actually one of the most extraordinary women. She was an author. She was an artist. She was an architectural designer. She believed that women and girls should move into spheres that they had not traditionally been in.
The Hoovers led exceptional lives with many accomplishments that bettered the lives of tens of millions of people around the world.
It's the highest ideals of the American character, and it all comes out of Iowa. Rising from rags to riches, he was an orphan, educated himself, built himself up, made an absolute fortune in the mining business out of talent and hard work, and then suddenly turns his life to public service, feeding millions of people in World War I, and then once again after World War II.
Herbert Hoover was really a humanitarian. He always answered the call of service to humanity.
The highs, the lows, it's inspiring. No wonder the guy was elected president.
Hoover rallied the smartest minds in the country around trying to solve the problem of the Great Depression, what he called the War on 1,000 Fronts. There's a way to bring that story to life so that people understand it, not just intellectually, but really emotionally.
At that time, Europe was full of refugees. Guess what? Europe's full of refugees again. There is one touch point after another in the Herbert Hoover story that will resonate with people of today.
Right now is the perfect time to reinvent the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library Museum. We've had an entire technological revolution, an information revolution.
You've got an opportunity here to create a museum that is vital, that is immersive, that is emotional, that brings all kinds of theatrical storytelling and wizardry, and that tells a classic American story.
When you want to build a world-class presidential library museum, tell a story in a new way and in a creative way that will resonate with a new generation and a new audience of people.
Education is less like filling a bucket and more like lighting a fire. We're going to tell that story in a way that captures the imagination, inspires people, and leaves them hungry for more.
We want to activate their sense of civic partnership, their civic responsibility to be a part of making the world a better place.
That way, he becomes more relevant today than he has been at any time in the last 50 years.
I really believe that a museum like this can help call all of us to service to others and inspire us to see what we can do in our own lives.
It's an opportunity for all of us to contribute and show our pride in having this presidential library in our state.
We need your support to bring that story to life today for a contemporary audience using 21st century scholarship and 21st century showmanship.
Come join our vision to share an Iowa treasure with the world and to empower others to lead an uncommon life.
All right. Oh, I get so excited every time I see that. So where are we today? Well, the work that BRC has been doing is basically taking the concept, much of which you just saw in that video, and now starting to translate it into physical space. So we're in we just finished what we call the schematic phase. So this is the step before we actually dive into full design detail. So now we start thinking about, how does this fit in the building? What are the components? How do we translate this and evolve this into something that's going to be built? So a lot of what you're going to see today are renderings and ideas that are at that schematic level, which is the framework for precursor to design. So you're going to see a lot of things in this kind of format, which we call kind of like white models. We start to block things out in with massing and sizing. In some cases, just rudimentary shapes, so we can get a sense for how things are going to fit into the space. And then all the details are going to begin when we start our work coming the beginning of the new year. And that'll take us all the way to opening day. So that's the context for what you're about to see. I'm excited to share it with you. So when you first walk into the main space, here we have our story hub. And this is the place now where we have the inlaid map in the floor, which isn't into this rendering here, but that's the space that we're talking about. And off of this space, you have your choice of areas that you're going to go to explore. The years of adventure to the left and the years of service to the right. And you're greeted here by a classic portrait of Bert and Lou greeting you as you walk in. So we're going to start off with our years of adventure. You're greeted by a portal. We're looking at what is the visual imagery in this portal that gives you the strongest sense of what you're about to see when you go inside. So we kind of gravitated to these two images of Bert and Lou, which to us are really sell the idea that they led a life of adventure. So you walk inside, and the first thing that we encounter are the years of growing up. So if this was a movie, this is where we meet our cast of characters. So first, we get introduced to West Branch, Iowa, in a very brief way. And it's a small community. It's actually a fairly new community. So we do a brief introduction about that, and then an introduction to one of the families that live there, the Hoovers. So we meet them and we learn about their life, and the resilience, the sense of service, the Quaker community, and what they do on a daily basis. And then we also take that over to, then we meet the Henrys as well. And we start to introduce the lives of the Henry family and Lou. Now, at this point, their lives are separate, and they're going to run in parallel for a little bit, just like in a movie. And then eventually their lives are going to come together. So we introduce these characters, and the image that you see on the right is a moment that starts to bring their stories slightly together around this love of learning, the love of books. And for each of them, the idea of books is something very different. For Bert, in a way, books are an escape from a very hard life. You know, he's young, he's working, he's orphaned, somewhat a bit of adrift, and books give him this wonderful exposure to what he called a life beyond life. And for Lou, the idea that books are a source of learning and betterment as a young woman that she just absolutely craves. So this exhibit here on the right is a way to kind of bring that commonality together for the two of them. And we see this space as really coming to life with these warm wood tones and large imagery to really start to draw you into their story, using the faces of them and their families and some of the objects from their growing up years. And now their independent stories converge in an area we call Bert and Lou Together and Apart. So Bert's story is on the left, Lou's story is on the right. They meet at Stanford University, and at this point, Bert goes off on a starts at the beginning of his successful mining career in Australia, and Lou is still in her studies at Stanford on the right. But they continue to correspond across the distance that separates them. So the idea is that we have these letters that are in a way kind of floating between them over top of the space that you're walking through. And we have on the sounds of people working in the mines on the left, and some of the tools that they were working with, and the rocks and the stones that you can touch and get a sense of what it was like, you know, in the mines. And on the right, we have Lou in her lab at Stanford University. So this is the beginning of their courtship, but their distance has separated them. And then when you turn the corner, this is when everything changes for them. They marry. I'm going to pass through this as some of the look and feel of the Bert and Lou Together and Apart area. And then we move into an area that from one of Lou's writings. She called this period in their life on the jump, where they just traveling all around the world, accompanying Bert on his work, working with mining all over the world. So in this area is meant to give the feeling of international travel. So in this space, we divided it up into a couple of story areas that highlight really some key places that they visited for work, and also to explore the cultures there, including China, the steppes of Russia, Burma, Australia, and we have supporting objects and that support some of these areas here. And then what we also have is how this family, this growing family, now they have two children. And by the age of 5, they circumnavigate the globe, I don't know how many times. So we also wanted to give a sense of just their everyday life as a family. And there's some media moments that happen in this space, especially regarding the map here, that come to life almost kind of like in an Indiana Jones style, where, the old maps that show them traveling around the world with these little red lines, and they bring to life these story moments around this space. So you can get a sense of just kind of the what the world was like back then, and also what the Hoovers were doing in terms of work and exploring different cultures around the world. So after this very sort of active, immersive, hands-on area, then we come into this area centered around De Re Metallica. This is a space where now we just kind of sit back and are reflecting on some work that Bert and Lou were doing together, both personally and professionally, in translating De Re Metallica into the English language over a period of a number of years together. And for them, this was a huge personal and professional achievement they accomplished together, and of course, won awards for their work. So here we were going to showcase the work that they've done together, and really highlighting the contributions and bringing Lou's work also in parallel with Bert's and the work that they're doing in this field. And then very dramatically, things start to take a turn. As you walk your way through the space, you begin to enter the time period of World War I and an area that we're calling a new calling. And this is a moment that, of course, changes the course of history, the lives of millions and millions of people, and Bert and Lou and their family as well. So as you turn the corner, you start to see the images of war breaking out. Using archival footage, you can hear around you the sounds of war and the headlines of war. And the point is, as you walk into this space, we have an area that we're conceiving as kind of in the middle of distress, that gives the feeling of being in the middle of a war zone. And we are kind of inspired by the stories of the kids going up to the roof of their London home and watching the bombing of London from the roof of their home. So in the midst of all of this, there's the war is now at their doorstep. And though Bert and Lou begin the process of taking stranded Americans and getting them back home to the U.S. at the outbreak of war. So this area, through the combination of scenery and props and Bert's sort of desk in London, where he's doing a lot of his work, and also an area devoted to Lou, who, when she goes back to the United States, she is doing her part as well, and also preparing her children in the event that anything happens to her and Bert as she returns to Europe. She wants to make sure the children are taken care of. So this area also brings in that sort of emotional, personal story, that they were going through at this time. And of course, this leaves our story on the edge of a cliffhanger, because at the end of this story, when Bert understands that the Belgians are on the verge of starvation and that something must be done, this is the turning point in his life where he decides to let the fortune go to hell and enter his life of service. So we've constructed this, as if anybody that's seen this over the development of this process over the years, like a movie or a play. So this is the end of our first act, if you will, leaving our story on a cliffhanger where now their lives are going to change in a completely different direction. So we go back into the hub, and now we choose our second portal, our years of service. So here we're plunged into the heart of relief efforts during World War I. This is the Belgian relief and then the U.S. food distribution. So here you can see the beginnings of how we're starting to look at the space. So we've got the flour sacks and display cases of the way that the sacks were decorated by people who had received the aid, and all the efforts that were put in place, which is really just this amazing effort at Belgian food relief, and Lou's efforts as well in supporting the effort, especially in selling Belgian lace. So we have some of our exhibit cases will also have the Belgian lace, and many of the objects and artifacts in their collection that support the story of the work that they were doing. And then as you turn the corner, now we enter the period where Bert becomes, America's food czar. This is the U.S. food distribution effort, and here we bring to life the war bread wagon was an element that we really kind of gravitated to. So we decided to kind of bring that to life here in this space, and on this is where we're going to tell many of the stories surrounding the American food distribution effort, including the Hooverizing, and the ways that the Hoover sort of inspired the American public to do their part by volunteer efforts. And then these are the themes that we are starting to bring out really to the forefront throughout our story, is this idea of volunteer, everybody doing their part, and being of service to each other. And that idea is going to come much more forward as we move through the space, as Hoover is really starting to articulate his philosophies about service and the American people. So we enter a space that this is a transition space that highlights two transformative moments. The first is the end of World War I and the Treaty of Versailles. And on the one hand, Hoover sees this as a very, I would say, unpredictable outcome of the war because of the nature of the treaty. He is kind of seeing that this is going to lead to some serious trouble down the line. So we bring that forward, that he was really unsettled by the terms of the treaty. And at the same time, he has this impetus, this push to establish what would eventually become the Hoover Institution on War, Revolution, and Peace, which will then collect all these documents and objects and artifacts to study war, revolution, and peace. So these two moments, these two story beats come to life here in this moment. And then it brings us to an area where now we ask the guests to take a pause for a moment. So we've set them on these journeys. And here we say, okay, we're going to take 5 minutes of your time. We want you to sit down because there's something very important that we want to talk to you about. And here it's two things. First, there is the Russian famine is now in full force. And Hoover is making a case for providing relief to the Russians. And it's very controversial. So this media presentation takes us through Hoover's philosophy of American individualism that is now becoming really crystallized at this moment as he's making the case for food relief to Russia, and he publishes his treatise American Individualism. So here in this 5-minute film, we really bring that philosophy to life because this is the bedrock of so much of what drives Hoover. And it's going to be a red thread throughout the rest of our experience. And what this does is it really talks about, some of the threads of unleashing, the individual creative and entrepreneurial spirit, and also that sense of service and giving back as well, and volunteerism. And that propels us into his Secretary of Commerce years, where he becomes this dynamo. And in this space, what we envision is we're starting to play around with creating this ambiance of the 1920s. And the thing we wanted to do here was we wanted to talk about Hoover. We have an area in this room that is dedicated to telling the story of his work as Secretary of Commerce and what he was doing, and standardization and unleashing essentially a lot of innovation and prosperity. But around the room, we wanted to turn this story and show the effects on the lives of everyday people. So we're choosing like maybe 5 or 4 different groups of people through which we will hear the stories of their lives. For example, we might hear about a young family that wants to buy their first home. This plays directly into Hoover's work as Secretary of Commerce. Then maybe we hear the story of some European immigrants who fled to the United States and are looking to, for freedom and opportunity to make their own way. And so we're going to hear their stories. We might hear the stories of the Girl Scouts and the Boys Club of America and their work, of farmers, and the idea that the farmer's story is starting to show maybe some of the first signs of trouble in the American economy with the drought and the economic problems that the farmers are facing. So really getting the snapshot of this really dynamic time in American history, and with Herbert Hoover really being a force of nature in the government for unleashing a lot of prosperity and change. And then we pass through this, again, transitional space with the Master of Emergencies. And this story beat is very important because this is really what ultimately ends up propelling Hoover into the White House. So we're theming this area out centered around the Mississippi flood. Sort of the command center in their tents. We have some archival footage playing. We have a space for the current diorama that exists in the Museum of the Mississippi Flood. We're kind of reconceiving that and kind of using this as what I would call an Easter egg moment, especially maybe putting this down at kid level, so that if they're looking through one of these sort of portholes that we have in the space, they'll be able to look into this diorama. So giving kind of activities and little enticements, thinking about that as for kids as well as for adults. So this space talks about his work, sort of organizing these relief efforts, how it propels him into national prominence, and the work that centered around the flood era. As we turn the corner, the question on everybody's lips is who but Hoover? We see some objects and artifacts related to the presidential campaign, and we enter now into the White House years. So this space here is, you can see that we're starting to think about how the space looks and feels, and now we're going to enter into, it's going to have these elements of the White House and of Washington and of the inauguration start to be brought into this space. One of the things I love most about this space is if you look on the left, the person sitting on the bench is going to be able to look out those windows there. And from this sort of White House themed room, look directly out and see the birthhouse for Herbert Hoover right across the park into the outer areas. So really bringing that bookend story, and that's why we're calling it From West Branch to the White House. So it's a wonderful opportunity we had there, and we're so excited. So this area here, we'll talk about the inauguration, Hoover's vision for the presidency, which is sort of the image on the right there, and also what her agenda is as well. She is, in a sense, redefining the role of the First Lady. So in this area, we're going to talk about what her plans are as First Lady as well. And we'll have some of her dresses in the object case there. We're also going to include in there her Girl Scout uniform, really bringing those two things, I think, story-wise, together at the same time. So this whole area is really about talking about Hoover's vision for the presidency. And we have a nice photo op in this area too, where guests can stand behind the podium and take selfies and post those on social media. So wonderful celebratory moment. We can hear elements of the inaugural speech. We'll have really wonderful music playing in this area, and this vision for what Hoover has for the presidency. But as we know, several months later, um, history has other plans. So the first visible earthquake of what is to come begins with the stock market crash of 1929. So guests pass through a space that basically marks this demarcation line. And this is kind of what we're looking at here, is what the graphics might look like on the wall of this hall as we're passing through into the next space. And here we are now in the really deep into his presidential years. In this area, we call a War on a Thousand Fronts media presentation. So in the center of the space, we have these columns that are media that break down the story of Herbert Hoover and his administration and what they were doing to combat the Great Depression, what he called the War on a Thousand Fronts. This is the opportunity that we have after all these years and after now decades and decades of scholarship on the Great Depression and on the role that Hoover and his administration were really doing that was kind of in a way largely unknown to the general public at the time. Now we have the opportunity to bring that story full to the front, full force. So as the Depression is raging around, these media screens here take us through these bite-sized presentations to talk about what's happening as he confronts one crisis after another, and just when he thinks one is finished, another one comes up, and it's as if I think he to paraphrase him, he described it as, look, every time we get to the finish line, they keep moving the line. He had a very eloquent way of saying it, but that's the kind of the feeling we want to convey in this space, is that it wasn't the stock market crash. It wasn't just one thing, that the Great Depression was really a cascade of a series of perfect storm events, both nationally and globally, that few people on this planet had an idea of what was happening and how to combat it. And Herbert Hoover was probably among the most knowledgeable. So this really is meant to bring that to life. And I think this is going to be one of the most dynamic and fascinating areas of the entire new museum. Now, around this space, so as you're here in the center, you're going to be getting this story in these sort of digestible bite-sized moments. And then around the space, these are the exhibits on the presidency. So the new museum experience is really going to expand our exploration of the presidency in general. So around, we'll deep dive into things like what was life like in the White House with the Herbert Hoover family. So we have Lou's home movies. We have stories of their children, their pets, of Camp Rapidan. Some of their philanthropic efforts, which they did quietly and frankly without most people even knowing, but they're also performing those services well. They're domestic, and Hoover's domestic and international policy, and also coming up to the campaign of 1932 and how that was playing out. We have some really interesting artifacts too that are going to support these areas. And then also bringing forward to the idea of what was happening in American life. So time and time again, what we're trying to do is, as we're telling the story of Bert and Lou and the White House and the administration, also telling the story of what's it like from the perspective of the everyday Americans. So we get this really full, rich picture. So this area of American life is where we're going to talk about a lot of that. We also, I think we're very happy to, we see an opportunity in here, back in 1932, Rose Wilder, as the Depression is really raging, and she and her family and mother are kind of out of money, convinces her mother, Laura Ingalls Wilder, to write her memoirs about growing up, and hence begins the Little House series. So this will be one of the many stories that we tell in this area as well. Of course, we go through the election, and that's part of one of our transitions. Herbert Hoover loses the election to FDR, and we enter this space now here. And some of our challenges from here on out were that Herbert Hoover lived a very long and productive life. So we had to cleverly find a way to bring to life the continued involvement and activity of this man post-presidency. So this gallery here is a very, I think, clever gallery that we're temporarily calling sidelined but not silenced. And this takes place from the end of the 1932 election, he becoming a crusading voice against the New Deal and the rising authoritarianism in Europe, and his public service in the aftermath of World War II. So we can see this area as what we call, like, in a way, object theater. So we have some key objects in the space, and then an audio track that will briefly tell the story of what's happening with Bert during this time of his life through these particular objects. And some of the books that he's writing, especially bringing those to the forefront. And then the idea that many of the things that he had uh, been worried about at the end of World War I with the Treaty of Versailles, the punishing terms on the Germans, the economic vulnerabilities in the world, all that comes crashing down, and then the world is plunged back into war. So in this area, we really condense about 10 years of time into this sort of object theater space. And then, of course, in the midst of this, he loses his dear beloved wife, Lou. And so that also becomes part of the story that we tell in here. And we want to focus this around this absolutely beautiful portrait of her, and tell the story, that we found so illuminating about her character, which was that after she had died, they found these letters from people who've been writing to her asking for help, and of course her giving money to support people, and then them sending checks back for repayment and never cashing the checks, because it really said a lot about her character and Bert's character, in that they wanted to help, they were willing to help, they didn't ask for recognition for it, and more often than not, they asked to not even to be repaid for what they did. So we want to really bring that forward because it really, I think, is a capstone on who she was as a person and the life that she led. So now we move into our another space. Our tentative title is For Peace Alone. Some of these areas we're still working on the titles, and these titles really are mostly for us because they help us define what the story of the space is. And in this space, the centerpiece are miniature replicas of the Carillon bells that stand at Stanford University at the Hoover Institution. And around the space are stories about the legacy of Bert and Lou told by the people who knew them. So these would be stories about his service to two presidents, regarding the Hoover commissions with Eisenhower and Truman, his service with the Hoover Institution, his service with the Boys Club, and Lou with the Girl Scouts. And this is the place where we want to, really bring forward the major themes, the major accomplishments of their lives in this space. And then we turn our story in our last space kind of over to our audience. This is an area that we call Uncommon Iowans. And in reflecting back on the story of Bert and Lou, we honor those uncommon Iowans that are honored by the foundation for their public service, the uncommon students who show also a lot of promise in their endeavors as well. And in this place, we want to honor them, and the way that they reflect a lot of the values of service and enterprise that Bert and Lou demonstrated throughout their lives as well, and really give an opportunity to pass the torch from two lives very well lived, the lives of service, and say, okay, now it's your turn. What are you going to do? So well, we're kind of picturing in this space that we have probably an interactive screen where you can explore some of these stories of people who have been honored, and also a flexible exhibit that can be changed out every year depending on who that crop of honorees are that year, so they can be honored for their work as well. And then as we exit, just a little final moment of humanity. We have these kind of Bert images of Bert kind of talking to each other, if you will, across time. So on the right-hand side, as you walk out, there's this little alcove with a figure of young Bert as a boy fishing in the creek in Iowa, one of his favorite pastimes. And then on the left-hand side, in a very similar fashion, would be the older Bert, just like you have right now at the end of the exhibit, fishing in his later years. One of his favorite pastimes. So these two images of cross time are the last things we want to leave guests with. These very sort of human moments, which I think are kind of befitting what his philosophy was, and one of his favorite pastimes. So that takes us to the end of where we are again in this schematic level. I mean, you can look at this and see, okay, these are all really about putting the ideas into the space, and then we're going to start working on the details. We're also going to be redoing the Flex Gallery, the temporary gallery in there, updating that and some of its technology, and making it even more accessible for future temporary exhibits, and polishing up the theater as well. And those are the basic schematic level plans for what's going to be the new museum. We're really excited to dive in and just start to put detail on all these things that we're seeing here, and really refining them in the stories and working with the team and the staff. It's been just an incredible process working with everybody. So with that, I think that leaves us about, some time for any questions you might have.
I would just add, Matt, we have some people online that perhaps are not used to using Teams as frequently as some of us do. So we'll ask some questions here in the room if there are any, and then if you're online and you have a question, at the very top of your page, there's a little hand that says raise. Just click that and we'll go through and unmute your microphone and have you ask the question at that time. So if you have a question, click the hand raise and we'll start off here locally if anybody has any questions. Ken Fawcett, yes.
I'm just wondering where and what's going to be in the room where the Waldorf room is now. Is that used in one of these segments, or is there something from that room that's going to be used in the new exhibit?
Yeah, the Waldorf room itself will not be in the new one. But what we're going to do, that room is what we're currently calling For Peace Alone. So that's the legacy room, the one with the fireplace in it. So if you think about the footprint there, that's where they're going to go in to kind of get the capstone of that brings together the legacy experience. And then we're going to funnel out from there into the Uncommon Iowan space before guests exit out back into the hub again. We're also looking too at some of the elements from the Waldorf room, in looking at ways that we can display them around, into different parts of the experience where necessary. One of the things too, as we were going through the experience with a lot of the team too, is, in bringing the museum up to today's sort of conservation standards. There's a lot of objects now that have kind of been out on display for far too long, according to National Archives standards. So part of what we're going to be doing is creating a system too, where some of those objects can go away and rest for a while, and then bring them out. So giving maybe a little bit more of a flexible system for displaying some of the things, like some of the things you might currently see in the Waldorf room.
Great question.
Thank you.
Anybody else here locally? Oh, we got a question in the far back.
Yeah, could you elaborate on some of the people who might appear in the Uncommon Iowan section?
Did you hear that, Matt?
Yeah. You know, I can tell you for sure, it'll be anybody who is a recipient of the Uncommon Iowan Award and the Uncommon students. So we're looking at creating a searchable digital, interactive that will let you uncover their stories. I can see ways in which we can do that by kind of allowing people to search by, in many ways, areas of interest as opposed to just, a general alphabetical list. So there are ways we can do it where actually be fun and almost like a process of discovery. So that's the first thing, is we know that for sure. And we haven't gotten too much in the details yet on who else might be in there. I think that's an open question at the moment. More to come on that one, but always open to hear what people think.
Hi, I had a question about, I know it's probably premature, but for kids in interactivities, what are your thoughts? Touch, feel, whatever they can do as they come through the museum?
Oh, that's a good question. I didn't get into a lot of detail on that here, but we've actually spent a lot of time on that as well. We're throughout the entire museum experience, we're incorporating all kinds of accessibility opportunities for lots of different people. For example, for people who are visually impaired or who just prefer to touch things, we're going to be creating opportunities for people to touch materials, props that will be replicas of certain objects. For people who are visually impaired, we're going to have these sort of busts of Bert and Lou that they can touch those and so glean from that what they look like if they can't look at a picture. So that and many other things, smell, right? The idea of scent, and especially in the Life on the Jump area, we're looking at opportunities in there for people to interact with, like, props and clothing and things like that, we really want people to be able to touch things and to smell and to hear and maybe even taste one day, who knows? But we got it. Yeah, we're looking at the whole museum for an opportunity for all kinds of ways to interact and engage.
Thank you.
I think we had one more. Yeah, go ahead.
I was wondering if the videos that are the people that were directly impacted by Hoover's benefits in Europe that talk about, the Hoover rolls and things, will any of those be incorporated in the new museum?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are gold, right? I think any opportunity that we have for people to speak in their own words, we're really excited about that. So yeah, we have opportunities for those. We want to try to leverage as much of that as we can, not just those videos as well, but others where people are talking about, the impact that of anything that the Hoovers had on their lives.
Do you have any other local questions? We'll go online. David, who do we have online?
Diana. Let's see here.
Just hover over her name, it'll tell us what it is. Diana Nolan, we're going to unmute you if you want to ask your question.
As soon as sorry, I'm having trouble with that part.
Give us 1 second. Diana, can you try to unmute yourself? I think it's because you have the mute all up at the top, maybe.
Yes. Can you hear me?
There you go. Yep, we can hear you.
Thank you. Well, can you please walk us through the construction timeline, when you anticipate beginning and how long it will take?
I wonder, Monday, if maybe that's a question for you. I can tell you that we're looking to start in January in terms of diving back into full design. And then once we start, the whole team keeps going until we open. So Monday, do you want to talk a little about the overall timeline?
Yeah, you bet. Hi, Diana.
Hello.
I can help with that answer. So as Matt indicated, BRC will be coming back on the project after a little bit of a brief, not hiatus, but we've been really focusing on the construction side of the project. We've got a firm out of Iowa City, McComas Lucina Construction, who's been our construction manager at risk through now, helping to kind of navigate what the actual physical project is going to look like. And so MLC, I'm calling them for short, another acronym here. MLC desires to come on site to start the project within the first quarter of 2025. And at that time, whatever that specific date is, it would mean a closure of the library and museum. And once the project begins, it will be about 18 months until that project completes and is ready for reopening. So if we do close first quarter of 2025, that would put a reopening of the museum mid-year, summertime of 2026 is the anticipated and projected timeline. Good question.
Thank you. May I ask one more?
Of course.
Will the physical footprint of the museum change? Will you be expanding to accommodate these new features?
Correct. There will be an addition of about 2,200 roughly square feet, and that location of that addition is off of the current entrance, which is roughly on the southeast facing side of the building. So, excuse me, that will better accommodate groups of people. We'll have more space in a lobby that's more accommodating for groups, a potential small gathering space, education space, maybe even for some small programming. But again, we have a lot of young Iowa students coming through the museum on an annual basis, and that will allow us to better welcome them, accommodate them, and stage their visits as they come through the film, into the museum, into an educational space. So yes, there will be an addition as well.
Will that necessitate a change in your parking lot?
No, actually, parking will remain as it currently is today. It will affect the drop-off area. Instead of a little bit of a U-shaped drive at the front doors, it will now allow bus drop-off and other event drop-off to occur just a little further out away from the building. So we will still be able to accommodate the number of parking places that are there today.
And there's actually going to be a plaza addition for seating outside as you come in to the building, with a landscaping and a nice gathering space that we don't have now.
How's fundraising going?
Great. We have raised 16.7.
Yes.
I'm looking around, it fluctuates on the daily. $16.7 million of the $20.3 million project to date. And we anticipate wrapping that up, if not by the end of the calendar year this year, 2024, or very shortly thereafter. And we'll continue, obviously, for those folks interested in the project beyond and in the years ahead, for sure.
Thank you. Now I'll let somebody else ask a question.
Thanks. They're all great questions. Is there anybody else online, David?
No other questions.
Anyone else here in the building with a question? Yeah, Faye.
Will this Hope reopening coordinate with Hoover Hometown Days? Is that a hope?
Wouldn't that be nice?
That's a hope. That so the question for those who might not have heard is, will the reopening of the museum coordinate with Hoover's Hometown Days, which is in early August, usually every year here in West Branch? And that is very much the hope and the desire that that happens. Yes. Keeping in mind that 2026 is also the semi-sesquicentennial of the United States, so 250th anniversary, so a big year there as well. So we would love to capture the ability to also focus on the 250th birthday of the United States. But yes, good question.
Thank you.
Anybody else online? Don't see any hands.
We recorded this, and so we plan to send out a recording of this or a link to the recording of this so that you can watch it again or share it with others or forward on to others so that we can share this vision with everybody. We're very excited.
Diana has another question.
Oh, we have one more question.
Yeah, the reporter in the room here. So will you have any new high-res JPEG images that we can use in reporting on this? Because I think the spring was probably the last time I reported on it.
Yes, actually, BRC Imagination Arts, and with Matt's help here, we have 3 really great high-res images of some of the amazing galleries that we'd be happy to share with you. But we also have a public version that shows the exterior of the renovation project with that plaza that Shelley was mentioning. So we can share all of those.
Perfect. And we can't access Dropbox anymore. So either just attach them individually or like OneDrive or something that maybe I can hit that link. Thank you.
I'll get those over.
All right. Not seeing any additional questions online or here in the room, but certainly reach out to any of us at the Hoover Presidential Foundation if you have questions. We appreciate everybody's in-person attendance and virtual attendance. And please, if we can give Matt Solari a round of applause.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure as always.
We very much appreciate everybody's time, Matt, yours included. And thanks so much for being a part of today's presentation.
All right. Thank you, everyone.